Morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi, my name is Jeff Brown, and I'll be presenting today my paper on attrition of workers with minoritized identities on AI teams. A couple kind of preliminary information. Oops, podium. I'm at San Diego State University right now, although this work I did completely with the partnership on AI, so I still am doing some work with them as well. And I also want to definitely first give a shout out to my co-authors, especially Jiyoo Chang, who's here in the audience today. So a couple things. Today's presentation, I'll first go over some of the broad goals, including a little bit about the rationale and our approach for the study and a reason for approaching it the way we did. I'll talk a little bit about the methods and also the recommendations. I'll spend a fair amount of time on the recommendations and the themes we found in this survey. Of course, in the full paper, I go into much more detail on the methods and also the rationale. I'll kind of skip over those today. The goal for this paper was to investigate the attrition of minoritized individuals in AI. I am using the term minoritized instead of minorities because it places the onus, or it is said that it places the onus less on these individuals, and also kind of shines a light that they exist within a dominant society that marginalizes them in certain social contexts. And I'll talk a little bit more, as I said, about our approach, which was interviews with people who work in DEI and tech broadly, so in tech organizations, including companies and civil society organizations, and minoritized individuals as well in AI roles and those who have left AI roles. As far as I know, this is one of the first few studies that have focused specifically on folks working in AI in this DEI context. And also, again, a main goal of the study was to create some recommendations that organizations could integrate. Even though I actually don't focus on academia in this study, you'll see that you'll hear a lot of familiar lessons, let's just say that, or you'll hear a lot of familiar things. So I won't go too much about the rationale, but we know that retention is a challenge. So a lot of the focus on this kind of space had been on pipeline before that. So, again, we all know that the tech sector is not the most diverse sector, especially when it comes to things like race, socioeconomic status, and gender, for example, and as well as other dimensions. But before that, the focus has just been on the pipeline. So how can we get more quote unquote diverse people in the door? But we were wondering, well, what happens when they do get in the door, right? They come into a space that with a lot of faces that are not familiar, with people who don't share their backgrounds and experiences. And so, that therein kind of lies the problem. So the Kapoor Center was one of the first set of people who did a study on tech workers, that quote unquote diverse tech workers who left their jobs. And we found that they left for a variety of reasons. This is their tech leaver study back in 2017. So we heard things like unfair treatment in their organization, instances of prejudice, discrimination, and so on and so forth, workplace bullying. And so, yeah, we wanted to dive a little bit deeper on this question. This was a kind of a more of a broadband survey. We wanted to kind of dive deeper on this question in terms using an interview methodology. Of course, you may say that, well, wow, the focus now actually is on retention, not just in tech, but in the workplace more broadly. So this study happened before the whole quote unquote quiet quitting thing became like such a thing. So I will say that. But I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other folks doing the work. And again, we're by far not the only ones. There's a lot of folks not only focusing on the pipeline, but on focusing on attrition, right? So Alan Turing Institute did release a study over the last couple of years about women specifically and about maybe some of the factors that why they were leaving their tech jobs and AI jobs specifically. And as the Kapoor Center, I talked about as well. But we find that a lot of the work on attrition or why folks leave AI or tech more broadly is a little bit more diffuse. That is the crux of this slide. Essentially, you'll have an over-reliance on things like piecemeal DEI trainings, hopefully hoping that if we can maybe like quote unquote train the implicit bias out of people, maybe the workplace will be more positive for workers who are minoritized. You can hear by the tone of my voice that that line of thinking is incomplete because the problem is more systemic. And also, so that was the rationale for our study. In terms of the methods, again, I'm happy to go more to go deeper on this in the question section. But essentially, we wanted to, again, this is a buzzword now, but when we were doing the study, it wasn't such a buzzword. We wanted to take a very participatory approach. We were very interdisciplinary in how we looked at it. So I forgot to tell you at the beginning of the presentation, my background is a psychologist. I'm an assistant professor of psychology at San Diego State. And we had a sociologist working on our team, and of course, folks working who are more formally trained in computer science. But we wanted to really involve people who this work would have affected in the methods, even before we designed the surveys. So we spent a fair amount of time having conversations with folks who were already doing this work, albeit in a more diffuse ways in their companies, in their silos, in their organizations, and things like that. Talking to folks in affinity groups in tech that are focused, for example, on gender or race or queerness or what have you. So we spend a fair amount of time doing that in addition to obviously things like a lit review. And excuse me, when we wrote the survey instrument after having these kinds of informal conversations, we piloted the interview, which of course is a very kind of normal thing to do. I'm not saying that is super special, but we did spend a whole lot of time. Essentially, the semi-structured interview instrument looked a lot different post piloting the interview than it did before. In terms of recruitment, and I would say, this is maybe the kind of biggest self-critique I have about the study. Initially, we used a lot of kind of using our own network at PAI. So PAI is a multi-stakeholder organization consisting of tech companies and also civil society organizations. So we started from there and kind of branched out, and as well as reaching out to, again, folks like affinity groups, Black in AI, Queer in AI, and so on and so forth, and recruiting from there. But again, essentially, we can only reach so much of the corners of the folks that we wanted to interview for the study. And the actual study consisted of about maybe like 45 to an hour long semi-structured interviews. So we had a set of interview questions. Happy to go into more detail about what those were. And they're semi-structured in that if we heard someone make a point that I wanted to follow up on in the interview, I was free to go off script and do so. But I had a pretty much skeleton of a plan to go on with. A little bit more about the analysis of the interviews. So we used Hill's consensual qualitative research method. So sorry to sound like a broken record, but happy to go into more detail about this. But essentially, we had multiple coders go through the interviews and essentially take each maybe sound bite of the interview, but of course the transcript, to do to basically summarize that into a theme or a main argument. And we went through several rounds where we had both coders and also who we called auditors to essentially check the codes that the coders came up with. So we had kind of several layers of people who, said, "Oh no, I don't think this is the right code," or asking us to defend why we coded a certain main argument a certain way. I will also say, I forgot to mention that, again, kind of going with this way more collaborative approach to a study, even before we analyzed it, well, of course we redacted it, but we also sent the interview transcripts back to the participants to say, hey, is there anything more you'd like to add? Is there anything you'd like to take out that we didn't take out? And so on and so forth. And so we tried to involve interviewees as much as possible collaboratively in that process. But essentially, we used these themes and examples collected from these interviews, and I kind of brushed by in the last slide, but we interviewed 42 people. And we used the themes to answer these three main questions. Why do people of minoritized identities leave AI teams, or what makes them stay? What are the culture and climate of these teams more broadly? And then also, what have their organizations done to try to retain them? Again, in the paper, I go into detail about the demographics of the people we interviewed, but I would say there are a wide range of folks ranging in terms of gender, sexual orientation, ability, geography, and race, ethnicity, and religion. So broadly, I would say our themes fit into these 5 categories. So people talked about the general culture and climate of the organization, but also the systemic supports that they had or lack thereof. I would say desire to make an impact in the field came up over and over and over again, as well as some of the DEI practices that their organizations were actually implementing, and also what they were also doing to support each other. So we saw a lot of grassroots level supports. I'll go into detail in a second. So why did they stay or leave? So the next few slides, I'll just highlight a few of these themes. The information was really dense, but I'll highlight a few of these themes as well as some representative quotes. So work environment came up over and over again. And again, I don't want to give you the impression that like everyone talked about a toxic work environment. In fact, some work environments were very positive. But here's an example of someone who talked about a toxic work environment. This is a white female. It felt like a war zone, like you weren't working together to build a product. You were trying to tear other people down to get yourself ahead, which is not my mantra. So essentially, this person talked about a very competitive and cutthroat environment within their AI team. This participant was able to switch teams, and because of her new manager, that manager created a much more positive space, and she ended up staying with the organization. And again, I won't, I'm running short on time, so again, I'll kind of skim through this. But another very strong theme was appreciation for interdisciplinary work. The majority of our participants went into AI because they wanted to do work that integrated multiple disciplines, and not only disciplines in terms of, say sociology, computer science, math, things like that, but they also wanted to integrate work from multiple racial, ethnic, queer theory traditions and things like that. So again, we found this a reason why people stay or left. But again, people talked about experiences of prejudice. This is from a DEI professional who is kind of maybe has a more umbrella view of what the landscape is. Essentially, she's talking about especially the top layers of company creating cultures that do not take the experiences of these minoritized individuals into account. I'm going to skip ahead because I'm running a little bit low on time. So a couple of the recommendations we made from the study, people were overwhelmingly positive about the positive impacts of their employee resource groups. So say, for example, at a company might have an employee resource group that Black employees can join, or employees with disabilities can join, things like that. However, when we actually workshop some of these recommendations, including inviting the participants and other folks to a workshop to present preliminary findings, some of the folks said, no. Well, this is why we can't have nice things. ERG started out great when it was just us, then the company took over, and then it kind of became trash, right? So again, I don't want to overstate that recommendation too much. Let's get through. We talked about intentionally diversifying leadership and managers. This might be an obvious one, but again, there must be some understanding about the reasons behind the lack of diversity. the thing is, people know these things, they just don't want to admit it to themselves, especially the leaders. We all know that. We talked about DI trainings being more specific to be effective as well. And we talked, again, this is the harder one, and I don't have a silver bullet solution for this, or a silver bullet kind of a way to just do this. But essentially, they have to investigate their systems, norms, and expectations. I think this last quote from a participant is very illustrative of that. So this person, who's a male of mixed race, queer, said the organization pretends to have certain values about inclusion and diversity, but at the end of the day, the types of behaviors that get rewarded tend to be the behaviors of the dominant culture. Again, we all kind of know what this means. So my last slide, again, we have a lot more work to do on this. I want to really do work on academic environments, especially since I'm at an academic institution. But we also have a lot of rich data on mentorship, what mentorship works, what doesn't, it doesn't all work, and also some intersectional effects as well. Special thanks, especially to DeepMind, who funded this work. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for presenting. If anyone has questions, please raise your hand.
Hi, can you hear me? Thanks. This was a great talk. I'm really interested to go through the paper and check it out in more detail. I was curious if you're able to talk at all about this, since, as you just mentioned, this work was supported by a large, company that is itself very interested. I mean, this is a little cute, but very interested in how you can re-specify rewards in order to achieve results in some environment, whether that's an AI or whether that's maybe a corporate governance regime that could reward a different kind of culture or a different kind of identity set amongst people who work at that company. So I guess I'm curious to hear more from you about what some of the lessons you think are for what structural interventions companies could do, like DeepMind, for example, that could make this work less performative and more structurally effective in its implications.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I think from the results of this study, one semi-specific, it's a broad question, right? That goes into multiple systems and all these things. It should have started or it must start at the level of these folks running these companies. It should start at their own education, even before they become CEO or manager or VP or things like that. It's that deep, right? If you want a maybe more band-aidy kind of structural fix, it's structural, but it's still kind of a band-aid. One thing to do is to ask these employees, especially these folks of minoritized identities, but certainly everyone, because we all carry multiple identities, what work is really meaningful to them, and how can they maybe carve out space and time to do that work? Because we heard from employees that said, kind of to borrow your language, their managers were saying, yeah, it's so cute that you're interested in this, how AI affects women in the healthcare sector, but I need you to work on the bottom line. I need you to work on these quote unquote high impact projects. So maybe carving out a space for that and building space for that into their promotion structure. Another thing actually is, again, this will vary so much from company to company because he talked about companies specifically, but the promotion structure really needs to be looked at and really needs to be embedded by folks who are not, they're essentially we need more input from diverse folks in terms of what they think should go into promotion. Because we heard a lot of examples, we heard a lot of themes for that as well, about women especially fighting their managers, fighting the VPs, leadership of the company, for all these other things that should be promoted. Again, this interdisciplinary work, which came up time and time again, versus certain aspects of the bottom line. So promotion and carving out a space for kind of maybe quote unquote pet interests, I don't want to call it that, but that's maybe one way to put it, or some Band-Aid fix, but I think it goes much deeper than that.
Thanks.
Hello, hi. Thank you for the interesting presentation. So my question is, have you tried to relate these responses from the participants from other sources, for instance, online sources on the internet, where past employees from different organizations are reporting what actually is driving them away from the organizations or the culture in the organization that is actually toxic and not appropriate for them to keep working there. So maybe they have these self-reported reasons and experience they have reported from there. So this is one. And the second question is regarding how the different themes have been identified in the responses you have. So you mentioned that it was coded by humans, right?
Mhm.
So have you considered trying maybe sort of topic analysis, which can bring some objective approach to it? Because in using humans, it could be considered, okay, this is a bit subjective depending on who is actually identifying what relevant themes are. Maybe including a sort of objective way of looking at what themes can be inferred from the responses. That's just what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the second part of your question, I mean, there are probably other people in this room who could argue better than I can about the supposed objectivity, right, of the topic analysis. I'm probably not the one, but other people can. However, that in terms of like when we were talking about different methodologies, we wanted humans to code this and to look at it, just because we wanted to get at a level of depth that the team did not think that a method like that could really tap into, especially taking in the full context of some of these responses and really deriving some of the meaning, again, even from some of these quotes that we wanted to. But again, point taken, I mean, that is a potential for future work. It would be interesting to kind of compare. In terms of your first question, I think that, again, that would be a very interesting future direction of the study. We did not, we talked about quotes and we talked about possible reasons why people were leaving. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be interesting to tap into people who recently left and reasons why. That kind of will maybe get into some other issues as well. But yeah, that's a potential future direction. Yeah, we're hoping to maybe also do a questionnaire as the next phase of this work, and that could tap into that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's give another round of applause for our presenter. And
I gotta catch a flight, but email me if you have any questions.
awesome. So our last presentation for this session is on